Welcome to the Finding Financial Freedom podcast with the Frugal Physician, where Dr. Disha Spath will be your companion on this exciting financial adventure. Get ready to conquer debt, build wealth, and embrace a mindful spending lifestyle that will empower you to live life on your own terms.
Hello, and welcome to the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast, or you may be listening to the
Finding Financial Freedom with the Frugal Physician podcast.
So we are doing a collaboration podcast together. So depending on what podcast you're listening to, we are each guest on each other's podcast. So I'll start by introducing myself for the people who are listening to the Frugal Physicians podcast. And I am Elisa Chiang. I am an oculoplastic surgeon as well as a life and money coach, and I help physicians reach their financial goals.
And I'm Dr. Disha Spath. I'm the host of the Finding Financial Freedom podcast, and I write and podcast at the Frugal Physician. I like to talk about frugality and saving money and investing wisely and generally creating our ideal lives through wise money management.
Yeah, so the subject of this podcast episode is going to be happiness and money. So what is your thought about the relationship between money and happiness?
Yeah, I mean, this is something I've thought a lot about. I think money doesn't bring happiness in itself, but having money can make finding happiness easier, more possible. If you don't have money, it's certainly hard to do certain activities that you like or buy the things that you like. And that can create a lot of anxiety and a lot of a sense of unease. And I think when you have a certain amount of money, that it makes it more possible for you to find the freedom, find the ideal life that you really want. Whether that ideal life brings happiness or not, that is more on the inside. I think that comes from the inside. But being able to create balance and the ideal schedule, I think, requires a little bit of funds.
Yeah, my thought is that money is a contributor to happiness, but it's just not the largest contributor. There are just so many other things that are more important when it comes to happiness. Lack of money can certainly bring unhappiness. It can bring stress. It can bring anxiety. But once you have a certain amount of money, then learning how to spend it towards your values so that it can create happiness in your life, I think becomes the more important factor. And having more and more money doesn't necessarily actually just bring more happiness.
I think that's a good way to put it. I mean, so I come from a very poor background. Well, initially, I was born into a very wealthy family, but then we lost everything. And we came here to the United States, and then we were very poor. So I knew what being comfortable felt like. And then I was thrown into a situation where we just didn't have enough. There was a lot of food scarcity. My mom was a lab researcher when we first moved here to the United States. She was a single mom. My dad had just passed away, and we were on our own. And she was making about $30,000 a year and, supporting 2 kids on that. And we lived in subsidized housing. There was a lot of food scarcity. There wasn't always enough food in the fridge. We couldn't go out to eat. We couldn't even buy what we wanted at the grocery store, and that created in me this need, kind of like Scarlett O'Hara, in Gone with the Wind, one of my favorite movies, where she goes, I will never be hungry again, where she's reached this like bottom of scarcity in her life. And unfortunately, she makes a lot of poor decisions going forward and to try to get that money. And my whole goal is not to do that and to do it in a wise and ethical way, treating other people well and just making sure that I'm making the right decisions for myself. Because I know that I like nice things. I grew up initially, I was born into a family that had a lot of nice things, and I want that. But at the same time, it's a struggle for me. When I started the Frugal Physician, I was on a journey to pay off my debt, my student debt, and it was a journey for me to learn how to be frugal, to make value-based decisions with spending, and to learn that. I think for some people are like naturally good at it. Me, I'm not. And so when I started the Frugal Physician, it was an aspirational title because I was teaching myself how to be frugal and then kind of writing about it at the same time. And how about you? Tell me about your background and like where you come from.
And so I grew up in, I would say, a very middle class lifestyle. There wasn't food scarcity, but my family was definitely frugal. When I grew up, we did not have a lot of clothes or toys. So I remember we wore a lot of hand-me-down clothes for my cousins. And it was actually really exciting when we got that box of clothes from my cousins because they had like nice clothes. And then it was like getting a new wardrobe or at least really being able to spruce up the clothes that we had. I remember or it wasn't that often that we actually got to go to a store and pick out our own clothes. We went out to eat rarely, but we did go out to eat at times. And we were taught you only order water. And if we, by the time I got to like age 13, I was the oldest of three children. It was like, oh, well, we can round down and you can still order off the kids' menu type of mentality.
Yeah, see, one of my goals in life is like going to a restaurant and ordering what I want and letting my family order what they want and just enjoy that without having to worry about the bill. But yeah, I 100% like know what you're talking about. Indians in general are like, water only, water no ice, and we're sharing everything, and you don't get to order, whatever the heck you want off the menu.
Yeah, so I really grew up in a frugal household, and I think I just adopted that frugality to myself to the point where I really had to learn to spend money on things that made me happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So it sounds like you're kind of naturally, your natural inclination is to be frugal and you kind of have to make yourself spend.
Yeah, well, I love getting a deal, so that makes it a lot easier to spend when something's on high discount.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm all about the deal stack. And, I don't mind, I like nice things, but I do mind paying full price for it. I don't think you always have to pay full price for luxury items, and so I wait for the deals. I wait for the deal stack, and try to get as maximum amount of points out of it and the maximum amount of discount before I buy something. But yeah, it's like, it's, and it becomes a game. I think it's if it's something you're interested in, it can be really fun to try to get the best deal.
Yeah, that's so true. I do like nice things, but one of the things I did in my childhood is when I got something nice, I wouldn't necessarily use it because I wanted to keep it nice. And so now my struggle is, okay, I got something nice and now I'm going to use it. So
Right.
actually, a lot of the nice things I tend to get for myself are things like they have no utility unless you use them. So, for example, I was over at my sister's who she sounds more like you. When we were young, she did a lot of extra jobs so she could buy clothes from Abercrombie and Finch.
Yep, I did that too. Not Abercrombie and Finch, but yeah.
Right, but she went out to go make more so she could spend more. Whereas, I did work to have some spending money that was brought up in us, but I didn't work nearly as much. And it was more for jobs that I thought were fun, enjoyed, or because I wanted to work with my friends type of situation. But I would actually save and hoard money a little bit more. And so I was over at her house and cooking. We were cooking for Thanksgiving dinner. So I was using her knives and I was like, wow, these are really great. And so then I thought like, okay, I'm going to buy these knives. And I asked her where she bought them from. It was from Sur La Table. So I went to Sur La Table and I think one knife was like 200 some dollars. And I was like, nope, that's not happening. So I actually had to coach myself. And then Thanksgiving, and then I did end up getting those knives with a Black Friday sale. So
okay, awesome. And did those knives make you happy?
I do enjoy cooking with them. I do enjoy how well they slice. And, I had perfectly good knives that, they were branded knives. They're like J.K. Heckel, some German knife. But now these are Shun knives and they just slice so beautifully.
There is something to be said about the joy of just like slicing through while you're cooking and being able to chop something fast and not have to like, I 100% agree with you. Having good knives while cooking, if you cook a lot, it makes a huge difference in your day.
Yeah. And knives have utility only when they're being used. So I have a much better time just using the knife. But gosh, like I remember getting when I was a child, like this fancy like art set. And of course, if you use an art set, it gets used up, right? Like, it had those like color pencils and different paints, watercolor paints. And so once you start using it, it also starts to be messy and crayons break or the pencils wear down. And so I just never used it. I just like to look at my pretty art set and then use my old color pencils.
Yes, I know. And clothes are very much like that too, right? You buy a nice sweater or nice piece of clothing and you're almost afraid to wear it, right? And yeah, and that so when you spend a lot on something, then it becomes like almost sometimes it can become a liability because you're like, oh gosh, I'm like afraid wearing this. Like, what if I get a stain on it, and that kind of thing. That's why I rent luxuries. Like I rent a lot of nice clothing so that I don't have to worry about cleaning it. And then I don't have to worry about getting it dirty. I mean, yeah, I worry about getting it dirty a little bit because it's not mine. But at the same time, the stress is less because I'm like, oh, I'm going to wear this and return it. Like that's the whole point of this whole process. And, it makes it less stressful for me. But anyway, getting back to happiness though, let's talk about so let's get back to, does money bring happiness to you, do you think?
So I'm going to go into the research here.
Mm-hmm.
There was a study by Daniel Kahneman that was kind of this pivotal study in the money and happiness research where it really found that people plateaued. That money did bring more happiness up until about $70,000 or $75,000. And then after that, there was kind of this plateau in happiness. And so that was actually the kind of mainstream thinking for a while with money and happiness, though there was another study that came out later that actually did not show this plateau and actually found that more money did bring more happiness. And so that is more recent. And I don't think that's necessarily as well known. So it's really interesting concepts that come from the research. And what they did is they did a collaboration. And what they found with the original Kahneman study is he actually measured more unhappiness, that lack of money actually brings you unhappiness. And then once you get to around $70,000, $75,000, maybe that's the point where the lack of money is no longer bringing as much unhappiness. And that's because with his study, the happiness scale kind of maxed out when people kind of got to that $70,000, $75,000 mark. Whereas with the other study, they could continue to measure more amounts of happiness with increasing incomes. But I still think that there's a point where it's really about your mindset when it comes to happiness. Like if you've got, let's just say, a net worth of over $10 million, or you've got an income of multi-million dollars a year, I just think at some point, the money is really not preventing you from happiness. It's other things in your life.
I agree. I think being unhappy while having money is a first world problem, but so what you just said about like this whole like being unhappy until $70,000, and I'm guessing this was not done recently, this study, right?
I think it was done, probably, I think it was around 2010. So $75,000, might be around $100,000 today.
Okay, yeah. So up till about $100,000, more money brings more happiness, and I think I would agree with that. Having lived in the $30,000 range, when you don't have enough, when there's not a stable roof over your head, when there's not enough food or clothing, then money becomes the lack of money becomes a driver of unhappiness. And having been that kid that was made fun of for their Salvation Army clothes and stuff like that. Like I can understand that going up to 100,000 would bring more and more happiness. But again, and I agree with now being a physician and earning more than $100,000 a year, that at a certain point, more money doesn't bring more happiness. And I've made this choice in my life because or made this realization in my life because I don't work full time anymore. I could make double the amount of money I'm making right now. And I made the decision to make half of that because honestly, it's not worth it. To work that much was bringing me a lot of unhappiness. And I think that brings to the forefront, we have to ask how that money is being earned, right? If you're trading time for money in order to make that extra amount of money, then it becomes, sometimes it doesn't bring more happiness if you have more money because you're spending all your time working. Whether people making passive income, I think it would be interesting to see if more money brings more happiness and what that threshold is when people are making passive income and living off their investments. Do you know of any research on that end?
Well, first, I want to say I totally agree with you on the time for money because I went part-time in my physician work. Actually, a lot of it was the drive to work on my coaching business. But yeah, now that I'm part-time, I could never go back to full-time. It is so great just to have so much more time to myself and so much more autonomy with my time because I choose, in essence, the weeks I work, or at least I let them know the weeks I'm not going to work because I'm going to travel those weeks or have something else I want to do those weeks.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, trading time for money and making more money and more money just by working more can certainly bring unhappiness and a lot of burnout. And when you find to be able to create that balance, of course, we're privileged in that we're physicians and we can work part-time and still make over $100,000 usually. And
well, I will bring up that when someone has a solo practice, then when they're not working, they're still paying overhead. And so I have found that there are some physicians where taking time off with the solo practice actually is really hard for them because they're thinking about how much money they're not earning and how much money they're actually spending to be on vacation. And there have actually been instances of physicians who will send their family on vacation without them so that they can continue to earn because they don't want to be paying for the lease on their medical office and for their staff while they're doing some work, they're answering phone calls and whatnot, but they're not bringing in revenue.
That's a very good point. Yeah, and that brings into account again, how that money is being earned. If you're an employee, we're privileged in that we can work part-time and take as much time we need away. But yeah, if you're a practice owner, then it's a different calculus because then you're actually losing money when you're not there. And then you really have to focus on, the pros and cons of taking time off versus not. But if you are a practice owner, then you can create more balance in your day, in your everyday. You're not being pushed by someone else to see more and more patients and to push to burnout while you're at the office.
Oh, for sure. There is a lot of autonomy that comes with being the boss, right? But there are also other ways that private practice physicians can approach this by either employing nurse practitioners or employing other physicians within their practice or being a partner with another physician and having that partnership so that it's a shared office, especially if someone knows they want to work part-time. You can certainly be in a situation where essentially you have the staff I think maybe this works better for surgeons, but I'm just thinking it's like, okay, you could each work 3 days a week, 1 day in the OR and 2 days in the office, or it's sometime, it would work just fine for, someone works 2 days in the office some weeks and 3 days in the office another week. And you can certainly do like a part-time situation where you're essentially job sharing with shared staff.
Right, exactly. There are a lot of creative ways to make what you want. And so I think these are really good points. I mean, I think in the end, finding happiness is a process, right? Especially when you are a physician, and finding that balance is an ongoing process. Sometimes you find the balance, and then you go off balance again because you're getting pulled in one direction, and you have to sort of bring yourself back. And I think that's why there's so much value in coaching, because sometimes other people can see it easier than you can when you are getting unbalanced.
Yeah, that's so true. So back to the money and happiness and how much money leads to happiness. I certainly can think about past times where I wasn't earning as much money, where I was actually just as happy as I am now. And so I did an MD PhD program and I finished my PhD in November-ish. And so if I were to go back to medical school at that time, I was going to give up a lot of elective, if not all my elective time, which I certainly did not want to do since I did not know what specialty I wanted to go to at that point. So I decided to just go ahead and wait till July and start third year medical school in July when everyone else starts. And so I had this nice chunk of time off where I could really just do whatever I wanted. But we didn't have a lot of money. My husband was working full time as a high school teacher. So, teacher income, and families do live off teacher incomes, but it's a whole lot less than, it's a whole lot less than a physician income.
Yeah.
But I spent that time working part-time as a research assistant, making, I think it was $15 an hour. And then I spent time, actually, that's when I started flipping houses. And I flipped 2 houses during that time. I learned a lot about real estate investing. I spent a lot of time just meeting people and meeting people in the real estate world, but also I got really involved in this organization called the SCA and made a lot of friends there. And it was just a really fun time when I think back on it. And it was a time where I don't quite remember how much my husband was making at that point, but I think his total salary probably was around, I don't know, $50,000 a year. So even less than that, $70,000 a year, Mark. I'm pretty sure it was.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like, I think what you say there is that rings true to me too, because I went through this process when we were paying off our debt. We got rid of our big house and downsized to a smaller house. We were paying like $7,000 to $10,000 a month towards my student loans, which was crazy. But and I was writing about it, and we were living in a smaller house close to the hospital. We weren't spending a lot of money at all. Basically, all my salary was going towards my debt, and we were living off my husband's salary, which was about $70,000, and we were just doing free things. Like we'd go to the free concerts, we would go on hikes, we would go, any free activities at the library. That's how we would entertain ourselves. And we had young kids that would enjoy library activities at that time. So that helped. And, so, and I remember that time as a very happy time, actually, like with my family when we were off, we were quite happy. And, when I was writing about it, I would get comments, keyboard warriors on the internet being like, you're depriving yourself. You need to learn how to live your life, and YOLO and blah, blah, blah. But I was like, no, I don't think I'm depriving myself. I don't feel like I'm depriving myself, and that's why I'm writing about it, because I feel like we're achieving our goals and actually living a very good life without the constant need, the tug for lifestyle inflation. Of course, we knew that we were going to do like 2 to 3 years of this and then inflate, mindfully. But actually that process of inflation was more stressful than just being like, we're here for 3 in the middle of that 3-year period. Actually was probably the most peaceful, because we were making progress and being happy, but living way under our means. But then when that question of, okay, how do we inflate? Okay, let's start looking at bigger houses to buy and blah, blah, blah. That whole process was actually quite stressful.
Really? What do you think made it stressful? Like how much you could spend and worrying about like what you could actually, quote, afford?
Exactly. Yeah, like that process of like, what can I afford? What can I not? What do I want? Seeing the nice, humongous houses we can't have, right? And deciding on the moderate house, and then filling that up with, do we buy the top of the line things for everything? The whole process was actually stressful, and making sure we're not going past. Overinflating, and making sure we're not going past what we can afford. It was actually quite easy to just be like, we're just going to save as much as possible and, and not enjoy life, actually, I said it. That was a Freudian slip. And not spend all our money. And actually, people would call it enjoying life, right? To go ahead and spend, like people were telling me to do, like live more, spend more. But actually, it was more stressful to do that. I mean, now that we have established an equilibrium, we have bought the house, filled it up, have our lifestyle recalibrated at a higher price point, it's not as stressful. But the process of going up and spending more was stressful.
Yeah. Honestly, and I think for me, I won't call it stressful, but I had to be mindful about lifestyle inflation. And to be honest, I probably haven't lifestyle inflated as much as I just now spend a lot more on travel than I was willing to before, because that is my greatest love, is to travel. And so my travel budget has exploded almost exponentially, to the point that I'm still, meeting all my financial goals. But once I got into that attending salary, we still, I mean, we still, we definitely rented a really nice house to live in. And we started renting because I advise that whenever someone moves to a new job, because you just don't know how that job's going to work out. I'm very glad we rented because that job did not work out. But
that's wise.
We rented a 4-bedroom house, and it's just my husband and I. We have no kids, at hardwood floors, at granite countertops. But get this, it was only $1,800 a month. So that was super affordable on my new physician salary. And other than that, like our actually day-to-day lifestyle, I don't think was actually that different than, definitely no different really from when I was a resident or fellow. And it did take kind of slowly kind of being like, oh, we have this savings and we don't necessarily have to invest it all. And honestly, not to get political, but this was also the first Trump administration had happened around this point, and I was really worried about the economy, so I didn't necessarily want to spend a lot. But of course, the economy did great during that time, and I wish I had invested more in retrospect.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of fear, right? But yeah, I agree that as travel spending is, if you value travel, then it can bring a lot of happiness. And again, I think it depends on how much you're spending. Sometimes when you spend too much, it's stressful. Like, you spend excessive amounts to be in a 5-star place, and you're flying first class and you're expecting more, right? Your expectations are sky high. Like, I spent a ton of money on this better be good, right?
So I will say, I have stayed at 5-star hotels. I have stayed at the Four Seasons in Bora Bora. But my husband and I really, so I love being active when we're on vacation. So I spend a lot on experiences. So like when we went to New Zealand, I spent on money. Like we rode helicopters 3 times in New Zealand because we were going to do a glacier ice climb. And so we had to helicopter to and from the glacier. And then we also just did a scenic helicopter ride. And those were big spends that I really generally, we had actually done helicopter rides in the past, but definitely not 3 trip. But we found that because we're basically at the hotel to sleep, we just need a comfortable hotel, and the 5-star hotel doesn't. I will only book that if the idea is that we're going to stay at the hotel, or usually it's a resort when I do that, and we're just going to stay at the resort and enjoy the resort, and we're not really leaving. And so we'll do that for a day or two. Sometimes at a tail end of a vacation. But before we dive into travel, because then I can talk about travel all the time instead of happiness and money, I did want to address housing, because I know that when you decided to essentially frugal down to pay down those student loans, you also downsized on your house. And one thing I see a lot of physicians doing is maybe buying homes that are a little stretched from themselves and finding themselves house poor because of that idea of a doctor house and getting that dream house.
Yeah, right. And, and I think that's a huge minefield for physicians. We're used to living in smaller places when we're training, right? And it's easy to imagine ourselves living in that. When I went from a bigger house to a smaller house, that transition sucked, right? To go from fitting my family, which is 2 big dogs, 2 kids, 2 adults, in a larger house, and then going into a more compacted space. It would have been much easier if we just stayed in the compacted space and we were used to that, and and didn't upgrade first. But
back up. So talk about your upgrade. So when did you buy it? What stage were you at being a physician?
Yeah, so I made the mistake of buying a house in my first attending job. So we were in a modest sized house in Nashville for residency, and then we upgraded to a larger house on the coast on an island in a gated community. It was a very nice situation. It was a nice neighborhood, and that's what we bought into as I started my first attending job.
Got it. So you had just gotten your attending income. You thought you would have all this money, and so you went ahead and bought the beautiful house.
Right. And I thought I was being wise. We didn't buy at the top of our budget. We had a very strict budget. It was like, did not want to go into the 400s. We bought a house that was $350,000. And, now it's worth triple that. Or double that at least. We bought in the smallest house in a very nice neighborhood. We thought we were being wise. But then we also bought two cars around that time, had two car loans, had my student loans. There were a lot of needs that there was a lot of stretch that my physician salary needed to make to cover all of that. And on top of that, my husband had just gotten out of the army and was using the GI Bill to go to get his master's. So he was not working. He was in school. So it was just me earning. And I needed to take maternity leaves and actually have kids during that time because, I was at 29, 35 was looming, and our plan, to have kids included me taking maternity leave. So anyway, that whole milieu of the whole situation caused a lot of stress, money stress in my family. And that house didn't bring us as much happiness as it should have. It should have brought us way more happiness, but I found myself unhappy because...
I was going to say, there is actually a study about housing and happiness. And when people buy a bigger, nicer house, it makes them happier with their living situation, their house, but it does not bring them more happiness to their life.
Right, exactly. And, that the middle class doldrums, I call them, like, it happens when you have the picture perfect life. You've got the big house, the nice cars, but you're unhappy and you cannot figure out why. And that brings you even more happiness. You feel like something is broken inside of you, right? And that there's something incredibly wrong. Part of that, I think, is money stress. Part of that is you've just taken on a lot of debt and that you now have payments on, and then you feel tied to your job. You have to work in order to make those payments, and that makes you detest your job even more, even if you didn't before. And that it highlights that financial good money management and tracking spending can bring the peace of mind necessary to enjoy these bigger, nicer things. But also that happiness comes from the inside, doesn't come from the outside. It doesn't come from the things that you buy and the things that you have and the things that other people think you have. Happiness comes from being okay and sound on the inside.
Yeah. So there's this concept of hedonic adaptation. And basically, when you upgrade your life at some point, typically we'll bring you happiness in the beginning. So you've got that boost in happiness, but then you start to get used to that new life, and that becomes your new norm. And so our human brains start desiring more, and we think we need something else in order to be happy. And so that's the hedonic treadmill that starts to build up.
Exactly. Yes. And yeah, no matter what you have, you get used to it. So you can get used to the small house. The transitions are where you feel like, oh, I just downgraded and I feel bad. Oh, or I upgraded and I feel great. But soon you get used to it. Right. And then you return to your baseline level of happiness. And that baseline level of happiness is from the inside. Right. It's from what you feel, how content you are on the inside. And your day-to-day life, again, just becomes the same up, down, only now you're more comfortable when you're sad.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're totally right. Hedonic adaptation works both ways. And so people who have huge tragedies in their lives, once things settle out, they get back to their baseline of happiness too. But there has been actually research about this baseline of happiness. And then there are things that you can do in order to increase that baseline. And really, those things don't have to do with money. They have to do with things like practicing gratitude and developing coping mechanisms.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. But let's acknowledge, though, there's like a baseline level of money you need in order to then meditate yourself to happiness. You can't meditate yourself out of being hungry unless you're like a yogi and have been, yeah, okay, so like the masters can do it, but most people, most of us can't meditate ourselves out of toxic work situations. We can't meditate ourselves out of not having enough money to put food on the table for our families.
Oh, I totally agree. But I do think that as a physician, we definitely make enough that money should not actually be the issue. Now, it depends.
Exactly.
I get it. If you're in primary care and you've got multiple six figures in loans and you're working on paying them off and don't think you'll qualify for PSLF or aren't doing that for whatever reason, then yes, even the paying back your loans can cause that money stress. And, if you're, not all physicians make multiple six figures. Like some are at like $150,000, or I've heard of some pediatricians that are actually down at like $120,000. So
yeah, exactly. I've known primary care physicians to make less than $100,000 when they're not working full time, and there's a vast pay scale differential in different physician specialties that we need to keep in mind as well.
But actually, I will say that the difference within a specialty is actually way larger than the average difference among specialties. So there are pediatricians who make double six figures as well.
Yeah, right. And I know internists that have made $1 million in a year, but they're hustling, right? They're trading time for money. So yes, if you hustle and you work a bazillion hours, you can make a lot of money. But we're just talking like this is
where I want people to quote grow their wealthy mindset, because actually there are pediatricians who are not hustling. I mean, I happen to know one intimately, and there are pediatricians who are not hustling who are making multiple six figures. But what they've done is or at least the one example that I have in my head is that she's built a physician practice, a pediatric practice, where she employs other pediatricians. And so not only is she working as a pediatrician and in that sense trading her time for money, but she's created a business where she's got other people who are also working, and she gleans some income basically off the hustling of others. But it doesn't mean that pediatricians, it doesn't mean the pediatricians who work in her practice are unhappy. You can create an environment where you provide a great place for other physicians to work, but maybe they don't want to be involved in the business sense part of it at all. And you can even offer things like working part-time and having flexible hours, but create a practice where it's great for the physicians in the practice, it's great for the patients in the practice. And when everyone's happy, it's also possible to make that profitable. And I just want to put it out there.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, as an administrator, you can make multiple amounts greater than the employees in that practice by being the administrator. That's definitely, but not everyone can be an administrator, and not everybody wants to, if someone is just wanting to just be a doctor and be in that employed position, then there is a certain predictability to physician income.
I would agree. If you are deciding to be an employed physician and you are deciding to trade your time for money.
Yes, exactly. And even if you are an administrator making multiple six figures, there's a different type of stress that you're getting paid for a different type of thing, which is not being the physician, but being the one making the important decisions for the business. And so that's a different, I would argue that's a different field altogether. You're now a business person, but I think for most physicians, that coming down to it, we can meet our basic needs with our clinical work, right? Whether it is being an employed physician, whether you are a practice owner, whether you are an administrator in a larger system, that it's easy for us to meet those basic needs as long as we have a way to make money. Now, finding that happiness within ourselves, though, takes a lot of active work on our part, inner work on our part. Part of it has to do with finding balance, making sure we're not trading too much time for money, making sure we're not trying to go for too much money in exchange for our time. Also, it has to do with, finding the joy on the inside, practicing gratitude, like you said, and meditating and whatever. I think that's a tool in our arsenal, not the fix for everything, because that pisses a lot of people off, including me. I can't meditate myself out of burnout when I'm seeing 30 patients in a day, but yes, you can meditate your way out of the middle class doldrums, right? And then I think the third key piece of that is financial wellness. And a lot of that has to do with having a good budget. And as much as people hate hearing that word, budgeting, tracking your spending, whatever it is, having an idea of how much you're spending, how much you need to spend to meet your basic needs, how much you need to earn to meet your basic needs, how much you need to spend to then cover the things that bring you happiness, the activities that bring you happiness, all the optional spending, and then how much money you have in general, and how much money you need to have to retire. What's your runway to retirement? All of that. Having a good financial plan, I think, is a key part of achieving the peace of mind and the happiness that you desire.
I totally agree. I think having the financial plan, tracking your spending, and make sure you're progressing towards your financial goals is actually what alleviates stress from money and the stress from finances, and then also allows you to spend based on your values and spend in a way that actually increases your happiness, right? Like I have learned through time to increase my spending on the things that increase my happiness. And one thing I will bring up is that there was a time where I felt burnout in medicine, and my reaction was, oh my God, I need to save and invest more so that I can get to financial independence sooner. And thank God I found coaching and realized, no, what I need to do is create a better physician work experience for myself, and then continue to progress to my financial goals, which I'm actually totally doing well with, and then learn to enjoy my life, even if that means spending money, even if that means not saving as much and not investing as much and not getting to financial independence as soon. But if I'm enjoying the journey, then it doesn't matter.
Right, exactly. Because we really don't know when we're gonna go, right? And we don't know how long our life's gonna be. And in the end, we can plan, but God laughs, right? Man plans and God laughs. Like, yes, we certainly don't want to go out to the other extreme and just YOLO so hard that we get to retirement age and have nothing saved either, know? And also we certainly don't want to YOLO so hard that we get so dependent on our paycheck that we're living paycheck to paycheck and cannot give up a toxic job, or walk away from a toxic job. So yeah, there's balance to be had there. But it sounds like you actually have to give yourself permission to spend and work through that guilt.
Yes, that's been my journey. And it sounds like your journey has been learning how to spend in a way that you can meet your financial goals and still enjoy all the nice things.
Exactly. I'm the opposite. I have no problem YOLOing. I will spend, and I know, and I know the nice things to spend on. But I also know that not that only brings transient happiness. Things only bring transient happiness. But what brings me more peace of mind is having financial security, and choosing. And choosing the things to spend on is my current struggle.
Well, I think
and not spending too much.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up this podcast episode of really saying that it's about finding that middle ground. It's about finding how to both save and meet financial goals, how to both save and invest to meet your financial goals, but then also how to spend now in order to enjoy the fruits of your labor and spending in ways that make you happy.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I think there are people on all ends of the spectrum, and all of us can achieve financial happiness and financial wellness and inner happiness, but it takes work. it's not something that's going to come easy. So, strap in because it's going to need some time. And that's why we have these podcasts to really discuss these topics, right? Because this is not, while talking, while the question, does money bring happiness, it sounds like a pretty easy thing to tackle. In actual practical life, it's hard, right? Finding happiness, finding financial wellness is hard. And it takes effort.
Yeah. And that's what I do with my coaching, is really help my clients find a place where they're happy with their current living and meeting their financial goals.
Exactly. And that's why I podcast. So I hope you guys will continue to listen. Let's wrap it up. And Elisa, if you wouldn't mind telling us where my listeners can find you.
Yeah, so if you'd like to learn more about me, my website is www.growyourwealthymindset.com. And if you're interested in talking to me about what coaching looks like and how we can work together, you can set up a Zoom meeting with me right on that website.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for what you're doing. I'm Disha Spath, and I'm at thefrugalphysician.com, and I have Finding Financial Freedom with the Frugal Physician podcast, where you'll find the most recent iterations of my conversations with wonderful people like Elisa. And thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please share both of our podcasts with your friends and family. And Elisa, I will turn this over to you to give our final handoff.
Yeah. So you are listening to the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast with Elisa Chiang and
Finding Financial Freedom with the Frugal Physician with Dr. Disha Spath.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you back with our next episode.
Stay frugal, y'all.
The content shared on this podcast should not be taken as individualized financial advice. We are here to share our knowledge and experiences, but it is crucial to consult with professionals such as accountants, financial advisors, or attorneys who can provide personalized guidance based on your specific needs.